Yeah.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Can I just check so people can hear me online?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful.
Perfect.
Excellent. Right. Well, we'll get started because it's 9 o'clock. So good morning, everyone. For those of you here in the room and those of you online, my name is Mandy George, and I work with the Global Shelter Cluster in our environmental support team as part of our global support team for country clusters. Yeah, it's a pleasure to welcome you here today. It is our last day at the HNPW. It is 9 a.m. So I'm grateful for those of you who have made it here, both in the room and online, and hopefully have some coffee to help you along the way. So on behalf of the Global Shelter Cluster and also UNDRR, warmly welcome you to this event. If I could just thank also our donors, the Swiss Development Corporation and also the German Federal Foreign Office for their support for both the Shelter Cluster and UNDRR for this work. So the Global Shelter Cluster and UNDRR have been doing some work together, collaborating on this topic of strengthening DRR and humanitarian shelter and settlements programming. And so today we'll have the opportunity of sharing some of that work with you, to learn from your expertise, and also hopefully collectively we can contribute to moving us a step closer to strengthening our collective impact and breaking the cycle of crises. So I'm going to just present to you quickly our agenda. So the session today has two parts. So our first segment will be for half an hour getting introduced, speaking a little bit about the partnership that I mentioned earlier, and having a bit of a conceptual overview of DRR and humanitarian programming, particularly in conflict contexts. And then the second segment, we're going to get you doing some group work, moving around the room if you're here physically, or otherwise online in breakout groups, to really get stuck into some of the topics under this subject. Before I do a little bit of housekeeping, I just wanted to introduce the colleagues who will be supporting this work and who are organizing the event with us here today, both in the room and our online moderators. So here in the room, there's obviously myself. We have Kelly over here, who's part of the Global Shelter Cluster Green Team as well. We have Amelia here from UNDRR, who's a program management officer there. We have Marie over here, who works with Amelia at UNDRR. Then online we have Marcia Gwambe, who's part of UNEP's Disasters and Conflict branch. We have Norwin Schaefer, also with UNDRR, Program Management Officer. We have Madeline Marara, who's part of our Global Shelter Cluster Green Team as well, who's online with us. We have Misika Hitarachi, who's also a consultant with UNDRR and has been working on a lot of this collaboration that we've been doing over the last few months, and also Grisha Victor, who's with the partnerships branch of UNDRR. So thank you so much to all of our facilitators today, both in person and online. So just a bit of housekeeping. So the session is recorded and will be available for later viewing. So feel free to share that with colleagues who weren't able to be here today. If you're online, please stay muted and turn off your camera to reduce noise and also network strain. If some people may be joining us with not very good connections, of course, jump on camera to speak or ask questions at any point. Feel free to pop questions into the chat, and hopefully there won't be any technical issues, but if there are, maybe just try rejoining, and hopefully all will be smooth. So our objectives for today are threefold. Firstly, we want to showcase collaboration between humanitarian and development actors in fragile conflict and violence affected settings. Secondly, demonstrate some practical approaches for integrating DRR and environmental considerations into humanitarian planning and response. And then finally, to share some field examples with lessons learned, for example, from Yemen, which is one of the case studies we'll be sharing, and also identify opportunities for scaling up action. So really looking forward to your inputs into these topics today. So I will just hand over to Kelly now, who is going to talk us through some of the the first segment of our event, which is basically a conceptual overview why this topic matters and what we've been doing on it. So Kelly, over to you, and I can pass the slides through.
Oh, how many people know anything about DRR? Know anything about? No, stand up. Don't stand up. Okay. How many people have actually? Those in the audience or online, you can just raise your hand. That's okay. Okay, we're doing this in the room here. And how many of you have actually done physically something about DRR? Actually done something physically where you've gone out and moved a brick or planted a tree or something.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's good because I want to get an understanding of what we're talking about here and how many people know what we're talking about. So now you can sit down. So a couple of issues that we came together on this on the shelter cluster side and the DRR side is what we often see is that humanitarian responses often repeatedly go to disasters. And in some cases, particularly in the conflict affected countries, it's the same disaster over and over again. So you have the conflict plus the flooding. And we actually had, and Mandy was chairing a session on this day before yesterday, I think, where we were talking about flooding yesterday. And there's actually a lot of information online on that challenge, is that you have a conflict and you have repeated flooding or landslides or other kinds of things like that. And what we were seeing was a lot of times these opportunities to respond to the conflict weren't meshing with opportunities to respond to the flooding. So in the case of Yemen, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But what we were seeing was that even when people were told to evacuate ahead of time, their houses were washing out, which then created an additional burden on the shelter partners because they were having to provide the same assistance over and over again. So the idea came up, and so we need to try to reduce the risk. So it says build back better. I thought I'd change that. We'd like to also talk about build back safer because better sometimes is a little bit of a confusing term. Like I want a big concrete house that's better than the little grass shack that I used to have. But the concepts here are very important because we want to progressively improve the situation. We can't just fix all the problems, particularly in the humanitarian response, but we can start that process moving forward of improving things over the longer term as we transition to the recovery process or a stabilization process or something like that. So we want things to go better in the future. We want to anticipate that. And so UNDRR and the Global Shelter Cluster, we say we're leading this effort. We don't know if anybody else is trying to do the same thing yet. If we're successful, maybe somebody else will. But looking at it, we'll talk about Yemen in more details. We're looking at it in Madagascar in a different kind of situation. We've actually just started some discussions with Nigeria. We've had discussions with Afghanistan. And the whole idea is to try to incorporate a mentality and an approach that recognizes that risk reduction can be part of the humanitarian response and it will benefit the people we're trying to help rather than create a situation where we help them and then you have to help them again and again and again. Next slide. So good news. I did change that to say not so bad news. But anyway, so the good news is we know a lot about risk reduction. UNDRR has been doing this. They have lots of publications out. UNDP has been funding DRR work across the globe, continues to do that. There's a lot of participation in that. Donors have been funding organizations to do DRR, ECHO, and others. There's a lot of expertise that exists at country level. And we actually have an example from Yemen about they know what to do. They just needed to be organized and get some resources to do that. And once we start doing this in communities, they oftentimes take over doing the same kind of thing themselves. It's, protecting an area from flooding actually turns out in most cases not to be that hard. So if we get it started in the emergency response phase, it'll carry over. The other side of it, limited human and financial capacity. Now, many of the DRR activities we talk about are not that expensive, but still they take time and money from people's pockets. And oftentimes they don't have anything in their pocket they can use for that. So that's an important point. And then particularly in conflict, there's often limitations on human resources. In terms of the humanitarian response, we say, well, we got to go in and save lives and then we're finished. We don't have time to do DRR. In reality, the DRR is part of the whole process. And so that time problem is actually not real, but it's perceived as a problem. Sometimes we have a lack of information, but we also have a situation where one organization may be doing DRR in one place, and over here, somebody else is doing the same kind of assistance, but doesn't know that they're doing DRR over there. So sometimes the sharing of information is very local. It may be a couple of kilometers apart. So we want to deal with that. there's a concern, as I sort of mentioned, that you can't do long-term things in an emergency response. The reality is you got to start the long-term things in the emergency response because people themselves are doing long-term things. They're rebuilding their houses, they're resettling their lives and everything. We got to be part of that process so that they don't end up in a situation that's worse than before, but one that's better than before. This issue about working in silos is a little bit complicated because we have the clusters that are silos, but on the ground, usually organizations are working laterally. An organization won't just do shelter, they'll do water and sanitation and other kinds of things like that. But the silos have to talk to each other. The clusters have to talk to each other so that we be effective about that. And flexible funding. Everybody wants flexible funding. But in the current atmosphere, it's even more difficult to get that basic funding, but figuring out how to make it flexible, because when you go into a disaster and there's been conflict or flooding or things like that, oftentimes you don't know what's needed on the ground. So you need to get there and start doing things and then find out there are other things you can do or change the plan a little bit. And sometimes that's a bit of a problem with the funding. Thanks. Yes. So what we have done, we've worked together on these packages, information, and they're available, and they have really good covers on them, really nice colorful covers. So they're available online on the Global Shelter Cluster website and some, I think, on the UNDRR website. And then we'll talk more about the work particularly in Yemen, but also in Madagascar. The case of Madagascar is that it's actually not a conflict country, but it's a country that persistently has cyclones. I think they had 4 or 6 so far this year, and the season's not over. And so they face a lot of recurrent problems with cyclones and flooding, and they should be doing disaster risk reduction, but the opportunities to do that are limited. But if they can integrate that after the cyclone response is what we're working on, and so they can start doing risk reduction and reduce the likelihood of future disasters. Good. Is that an overview? Everybody ready? Do you need to stand up and sit down again? Trying to engage the audience. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more. Yeah. So we worked through the cluster and UNHCR in Yemen. And they then had good local contacts with national NGOs, national organizations, local organizations. And that was very important because it's not something that a big international organization could come in and walk into a community and say, oh, tomorrow we're going to do disaster risk reduction. That local contact, that localization aspect is really important. We talk about DRR, and well, we have a discussion later about nature-based solutions. A lot of the DRR stuff that we would do for most of the natural hazards, all the natural hazards, has an environmental base. In some cases, it's like, yeah, we don't want to pour concrete. Maybe there's another way of doing it. It's too expensive to use concrete. Maybe we can do a nature-based solution. So we talk about nature-based solutions. We talk about eco-DRR or eco-adaptation. They're almost all the same thing. But there's a very strong natural component or environmental component in all the DRR work that we do, particularly in the kinds of things that would happen during a disaster, right after a disaster. So we want to work with communities so they know what's going on. Now, in Yemen, we have IDP communities in the middle of non-IDP communities. And there has to be discussions and working with all these things, because if the IDPs start doing stuff and the community, the normal community that would be there, doesn't know about that, then you're going to end up with another conflict. So we want to avoid that. We want to be conflict sensitive. We want to avoid the tensions that we could create by coming in and trying to do good things, but not having everybody part of the process. And then what we have done, and UNDRR was very effective at pulling all this together, was getting a lot of information about funding sources. So there is actually a lot of funding sources out there. They're not necessarily as easy as we had before. For January 20th. But there is money available, and it sort of takes some innovation figuring out how to use it. But a lot of the things that we do on DRR in a disaster, post-disaster context, as I said, are nature-based, but they're also based on climate factors. And so that climate avenue is also one of opportunity.
I think we have a video on our case study of Yemen that we are going to show you now, just to get a little bit more sort of visual input on what we've actually been doing in Yemen and flood mitigation.
Donc j'ai été un peu... Attends, je me connecte un truc.
We were looking into funding to send all of us to Yemen, so you could go see these projects, but that didn't quite work out. It was a little too much money to have, and the visa problems and the air travel problems and everything's a little complicated. So, I mean, there was that option to go to Saudi Arabia and put you all on camels and take you over the border. PSS, the security people are a little concerned about. I wanted to go get the.
حقنا الخيام اللي احنا ساكنين فيها جابت عدواننا ملابسنا الاثاث كامل حتى المواد الغذائيه حتى ما خرجنا معنا الا الملابس اللي فوقها الى المدرسه.
Yemen
Stop sharing it. Apologies, we're just trying to figure out the technology here.
Yeah.
is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. Floods, scorching heat, droughts, rising seas and landslides are becoming more frequent and intense. Conflict and climate-related disasters have forced 4.8 million people from their homes. Most are women and children, left vulnerable to the next storm. That's why UNDRR is working with partners to build solutions, funding risk assessments, advising on nature-based solutions, and helping communities prepare before disasters strike.
تم تمويل المشروع من قبل المفوضية السامية ومنحهم UNDRR. تم شق سائلة مدينة الحجم بطول 2500 متر. تم حماية المخيمات الأولى الذي هو المخزن الشرقي في مدينة الحجم وكذلك المنازل التي تهددها مخاطر السيول.
Simple solutions can make all the difference. A well-placed drainage system keeps floodwaters from swallowing entire neighborhoods. Protective walls give families something they haven't had in years: peace of mind. Even modest investments in preventative infrastructure can protect communities from floods.
الأول كان في خايفين طول الليل من ساعة ما يصب المطر لما يكمل احنا خايفين نشيل نزاجنا ونروح المدرسة. فشرط السائلة وملوا لنا الأريم ذا. أنا الحمد لله احنا في أمان قعدنا خايفين.
This isn't just about preventing disasters. It's about protecting lives, dignity, and futures. UNDRR is calling for a united effort. Governments, humanitarian agencies, development organizations, and local community groups must join forces. The time to act is now.
Okay, so with that, I think we're going to jump into our next part of the session, our World Cafe section. So I'm going to hand over to Amelia, who's going to take us through the instructions of what we'll be doing and a scenario that we'll be working with.
Thanks a lot, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to have you. I see we have about 50 people online, so that's great. And then we also have people here in the room, slightly less, but glad you made it to the end of HNPW, and hopefully it's been a good couple of weeks. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to the scenario that we have. Basically, what's going to happen is that we're going to have 30 minutes for a World Cafe, which is discussion in groups. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but basically here in the room, we're going to rotate around 3 different stations, discussing various topics related to mainstreaming, environment, and DRR in humanitarian response. Online, you're also going to be split into groups, but with the difference that you're not rotating, you're going to stay in the same group all the time. And we have a lot of online moderators as well that will be assigned to the different groups who will guide you through the questions. In order for us to be able to kind of start somewhere and more or less on the same page, we have decided to start off with a scenario that we are discussing this from the perspective of, but at the same time, you all come with a lot of experience. Maybe this isn't applicable to your context. Maybe you have some own experience that was in a completely different context. So of course, you're welcome to bring that to the session as well. I mean, it's not set in stone that we only have to discuss this, but we chose this one because we think it's kind of typical of the challenges that we face. So basically, this is a country where we have an ongoing conflict, been going on already for 5-10 years, widespread displacement. The access to the affected areas is severely restricted, so that hampers a lot how humanitarian actors still have some access, whereas development actors don't or cannot go because of security reasons. But even for humanitarian actors, there are some areas that are more accessible. Maybe there's more projects there. Then there's other areas that are not accessible at all. And also kind of typical that this keeps changing all the time. So you maybe start a project in one area, but then something happens and you can't go back. High levels of poverty, unemployment. So there's these underlying socioeconomic challenges as well. Limited infrastructure, for example, related to waste management, water provision and public services. And again, like governance is extremely challenged. So for those local authorities that do exist, maybe they're not getting paid or so on. Environmental degradation, so we're looking kind of at a hot, arid location. Natural resources are under pressure. For example, trees being cut down needed for firewood or shelter, and high disaster risk. Again, this thing that we frequently see, we have droughts and then coupled with heavy rains, which leads to floods. Limited engagement of development actors because the country is not a development priority for many donors, and it's complicated to keep the work going. And then there's limited funding opportunities. It's a kind of one of these, not a forgotten conflict, but a conflict that has been going on already for a long time. And as we know, in any case, even the humanitarian appeals are like 20-30% funded. So there is this constrained ability to implement comprehensive measures. So your task is to, based on your own experience or your ideas, identify innovative approaches to integrate DRR and the environment within the humanitarian response that does exist there. Explore partnerships and discuss strategies to secure funding. There's just 3 stations, in fact, 3 questions, 3 topics. DRR in programming, so in the room, that's over there in the corner with Kelly. Financing DRR is with me outside. And then we have nature-based solutions with Mandy here. We're gonna have quite small groups in the room, but I think that's okay. It's gonna be more dynamic. And so online, how many groups are you creating? You're creating, so there's gonna be 4 groups online with about 10 people in each group. So yeah, we will maybe, I'll split the room here now. And what time is it and when do we reconvene?
So it's 9:25.
Okay.
We're going to reconvene at 10.
10. Okay, so we have 35 minutes. And I leave it to the online moderators to kind of introduce to the discussion, the questions, to manage the flow. And here in the room, we have about 10 minutes per question. And then we reconvene at 10 and get some key highlights from each of the groups and also have like an open discussion. So really looking forward to getting kind of your actionable recommendations. We're going to synthesize everything that's said and share it also with you. So we have a bit of a tip sheet for DRR environment mainstreaming going forward. All right, so with that, maybe I'll ask the last 2 rows to work on DRR in programming. So that's 4 people. And then we have, the next 2 rows on financing. And then here, the first 2 on nature-based solutions. And then we rotate, so from nature into programming to financing this way.
Oh, you're on screen.
No, I'm.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, so I hope you had a good discussion. I think we lost some people, or they're coming back. No, they're coming back. Yes. Great. Okay, so we're going to have a kind of a very, very quick recap here in the room. Yes, we have tons of people. Great. So we're going to do like a quick recap in the room, and then we'll go to the online groups just for like any key points that were not raised before. And then we can still maybe have a bit of a discussion, raising any issues. But just to note that at least in my group, there was a lot of really good suggestions. So what we're going to do with all of these is we're going to synthesize the recommendations, and we'll share it in a Google Doc with everyone that's been participating in the session, and then you can like feedback, and we'll try to synthesize it so we have a nice little wrap up. But maybe Kelly, you go first.
So obviously I did not win the handwriting contest, the clarity of handwriting. And I also did things differently than everybody else was. So these are the 3 questions we were trying to answer, but let me come to the answers. So one of the things we talked about was the reaction role, familiar with that. But the challenge noted was moving from telling people there's a problem to having them actually be protected from the problem. And this video for Yemen is an example of the work that UNDRR and Shelter Cluster in Yemen have been doing to try to move from telling people it's going to flood to getting to the point where they can do something about preventing the flooding. Another critical point came out from a project in activities in Mindanao and in Philippines was about having conflict-sensitive risk reduction plans, conflict-sensitive preparedness, because there may be conflict-related tensions, and you don't want to have your risk reduction work worsen those situations. So conflict sensitivity, I think, is important. One comment was when we want to incorporate DRR or resilience into emergency proposals is not to say we're doing that, but just put the things you need to do in the proposal, but don't call it resilience or DRR, because that might provoke a response saying we don't do DRR. And it may sound stupid and idiotic, but we've had examples where that's happened. So we want to talk about what might be doing, what might reduce risk, but don't call it risk reduction. There's a lot of discussion. Oh, by the way, talk to Mandy. Very important result of this. There are tip sheets from the Global Shelter Cluster and also guidance from UNDRR. There's a lot of documents that will help you out on that. And then trying to figure out who the development actors were. That's one of the questions. Essentially, we're all development actors. We're just working in a humanitarian response context. We need to think about the development side of things as we're doing humanitarian relief. Tools, by the way, remote sensing seems to be a really important tool across the board and well developed, and there have been sessions on that. A lot of organizations are actually dual purpose. So we had an example from, example of an organization that was doing waste management as a development project, and then there was a conflict and they ended up doing waste management in the conflict. So they just took their development work and moved it into the conflict. And I think that's a viable way to think about some of these things, of how to get stuff done in a conflict or in a disaster response by just shifting over the focus. And that happened actually in Turkey. And then networks. A lot of development actors have networks that the humanitarian response may not have, and trying to figure out what those networks are and take advantage of government access and things like that. Good, thanks.
Great, Mandy on nature-based solutions.
So very rich discussion. You might not be able to read my handwriting from back there. So we talked first about how would we determine that nature-based solution were the correct course of action, because they may often be, but not always. And so we talked about things like making sure you do a risk assessment, cost-benefit analysis, making sure that locally appropriate solutions are identified. But then there was a very good point raised that even if you determine that it's the best course of action, you may face challenges, for example, from local authorities who decide that they want lots of concrete instead of lots of greenery. So then there's a certain element of advocacy, showing examples that can work to kind of get over some of those barriers. Then we talked about specific environmental measures that we were able to incorporate in this type of scenario. And I mean, the list is really long, but it ranged from using natural materials to prevent damage in houses from water, for example, and flooding, the cow dung earth example, working with local farmers, through to bioremediation for the treatment of contaminated land that we mentioned. And then like settlement type of level stuff like coastal erosion protection and soil stabilization from plants, deep-rooted plants, for example, or trees. And then we talked about partnerships what partnerships enabled this. Again, the list is really long, but I think the key message here is you can't just work in your little bubble. You have to work across sectors. You have to work with other actors, from local authorities to those with scientific and technical knowledge, industry, environmental actors, etc. So that needs to be kind of assessed in this part, is where to use that best knowledge. And at the top of the list, of course, should be local communities using local knowledge. Couple of key messages from the whole discussion, I think, is that solutions should be locally informed and tailored, and that awareness raising is a huge component. You might put some beautiful solution in, but people using them may not be aware of why that's important, or changing behaviors around environmental activities is also extremely important, and for that you need a lot of awareness raising, and that there can be lots of benefits from all of this, including reducing conflict between communities, for example, over natural resources.
Great, thanks for the synthesis. On my side, on the financing, we discussed some of these new financing opportunities, loss and damage, the fact that World Bank, other IFIs are doing more of the nature work now, diaspora remittances, climate financing, even though it's very complex. So there is kind of financing out there. But the thing that came across the board as very important was really like the coordination challenge among actors. So identifying who does what and how these different types of financing and activities can be layered and sequenced is very important. Also, that we need to be innovative when we approach donors, so that we may have to figure out how we, by tapping into different tools and resources, can use humanitarian and development funds. Area-based approaches again came up as key, or as an opportunity, but again, like that government role and leadership and the need to capacitate the government also and all actors on just like the basic things of coordination, public financial management was key. Yeah. So with that, maybe we go to the online groups. If you can add anything related to any of these topics that has not been raised yet, that would be great. So who do we have as leading the groups? So Marsha, maybe first.
Hello, Marlene and everyone. Since I was moderating this session with Grusha, who took note, I would like to invite Grusha just to summarize the discussions. Grusha, over to you.
Thank you, Marcia. In our group, we had an overall discussion, and the focus was on the local partnerships as such, especially on working with the community, understanding that the solutions that they already have, and then bringing in tools that could help to bring in possible long-term solutions. The second was with partnerships with local institutions in terms of the local knowledge base and the scientific knowledge, and trying to build a bridge between them. And an issue that was raised was that in terms of local capacity building, there is in conflict situations, it is difficult to find the time and space. So from our group, this was the highlight. And yes, thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we see some of these common themes coming up. I saw quickly in the chat that Suman from Norwin's group has volunteered to feedback. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, as Norwin has mentioned, we had a very rich discussion, and we benefited a lot from experiences of the group discussion participants. So we discussed that it was mentioned that it's firstly very important to have a landscape assessment. So what is the scenario, what has happened, and how has it affected the areas, especially including the local communities and their vulnerabilities as well as capacities, and to consider how to integrate nature-based solutions. We also discussed actually in detail about an example in Bangladesh, which is faced with the situation of landslides, flooding, and fire. There are several settlements in Bangladesh with even with high numbers of people in the settlements, which goes up to 800,000 people. There are different agencies which are working together in these settlements and in these situations. The WFP, the UNDRR, UNHCR, as well as IOM. The issues we discussed were that sometimes more durable materials are not allowed to be used. And on one hand, this also facilitates or actually supports the usage of materials like bamboo and other textiles. But then there is a higher risk of fire, and also there is a need for maintenance and maybe change almost every year. There are different tasks involved depending on the type of hazard. So there's different work done, including cleaning of the drainage system, the flood hazard mapping, slope stabilization. One of the key challenges, or the key challenge, is also a cut in funding, and it is huge. It's actually serious, and considerations and discussions are ongoing how to face this. We also discussed about the differences between conflict situation and disaster situation, and that displacement might be, or people affected by displacement, and they have to probably live longer in this displacement situation than when it is a disaster situation, and or when people are actually living in their homes and are faced with damages. So these were some of the points, and I would like to request Norvin or any of the other group members, in case there are any further points, to please add. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suman. Maybe just to add also on the financing, we had a little bit of a discussion on the financing issue and a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel potential for climate financing also to be accessed by humanitarian actors. So that maybe to end on that positive note. So over to you.
Great, thanks a lot. And interesting that this multi-hazard approach came up as well, right? Where maybe you're addressing one thing, but then you're increasing risk for another type of hazard. So shows the complexities also and that need for risk analysis. Thank you, and I'll go now to Madeline's group, please.
Thanks, Emilia. We also have a very good discussion, thanks to the participant. Maybe to add on everything that already been said, one thing that came up in our group is to the sustainability of the activity of sustainability of ensuring that DRR are actually integrated in any disaster and so on. So one thing which came up was that it's to work with all actors, development, but most importantly with local government, local district. So we had an example from Sri Lanka, Nishani, correct me if I'm wrong, that where they organize a workshop with all the actors, and then the government, the local authority set up themselves action plan for responding to disaster that was funded by the government budget. So this, in a sense, ensure sustainability, because in terms of financing, sometimes we have no finance, so there is no developer actor or material actor. If the activity are embedded on the national or local district action plan, or how do you say it, strategies with their own budget, this in a sense ensures sustainability of having DRR integrated let's say in a country or district plan. Voilà. Nishan, please add on anything I might have missed what you mentioned.
Thanks. Just to add also how other organizations like the UN, Red Cross, NGOs came in with their own ways of expertise and capacities, volunteers. So it was a collective effort of how do you then supplement what government was doing, even in conflict contexts, so that there is some space of collaborative effort and collective effort, because not all can do everything. So that was maybe to add.
And if I may, in terms of tools, I think Celine mentioned that from Action contre la faim, what they do is at the contingency plan stage, they conduct environmental assessment using a tool called MERA. They used to use NEET Plus, but they find that NEET Plus has some, comment dire, lack, if that's the word, that was complemented by the other tool that they developed called MERA. Céline, also, if you want to add on what I've mentioned.
Yeah, it's a complementary tool, let's say, covering other type of activity and a little bit more easygoing to be used. But definitely it's a key action that we want to raise at our country level to use such a tool. Thanks.
Great, that's interesting to hear. And also if you, maybe if there is like, if the tool is available online for others to use, or if you have some information, you can put it in the chat as well, and then we can share. And I think that applies to all of us also as well. And when we share the summary, if you have some key tools that you want to add or share, that would be great if we can have them. So again, the government and the need for that joint plan came out quite clearly from your group. So with that, then the last group, Misaka.
Thanks, Emilia. Yeah, most of the very important points raised by the panelists and the online groups was echoed in our group as well. In terms of some unique points under integrating DRR, it was emphasized that the importance of the whole life cycle, whole disaster cycle approach in planning for DRR was highlighted, and along with the importance of having capacity building and also material and mechanisms to act in place before a disaster strikes was also pointed out. And an example came from a project in Sudan where there are DRR volunteers operating not only building capacity before the disasters, but also while actually behind the fighting lines, while the conflict is going on, still at whatever the capacity or level possible, they operate anticipating the potential disasters and coping with the hazards. Under financing, the importance of innovative financing measures or avenues, exploring them was actually raised, in addition to conventional donor funding or emergency funding avenues. So one example given was using a crisis modifier in an existing, like a longer term resilience building project, but having a component as a crisis modifier that can be triggered or invoked during change of conditions due to an emergency, and then how it has been used successfully to build DRR in certain communities. A very important point was raised under nature-based methods, which was actually, I mean, that this I thought the point kind of cuts across both integrating DRR as well as integrating nature-based solutions, which is keeping in mind that the knowledge of practical, easy to use, cost-effective DRR methods as well as nature-based solutions might already be there in the social memory of the communities. They might have already maybe fading capacity, but they might still have the capacity to do those, implement those things. So identifying them through proper consultation, through engagement, identifying them prior to disasters was, importance of that was highlighted by the team. One example was given about a tool that Swedish Red Cross is using, which is called Community Informed Green Response tool, which has been used successfully to capture these points. And also one point was another participant pointed out the importance of actually integrating these the DRR in emergency into formal training of the professionals who would eventually come into disaster management, disaster response sectors, so through vocational training or university education and so on. So those are the main points that I captured. Anyone in my team wanted to supplement that? Christoph, Christina, Aisha, anyone wants to add to that?
Maybe I'll stop you there and
Yeah.
see, if in addition from the group, we do have time for like 1 or 2 additional comments. Maybe there's someone in the room or someone online. Please raise your hand and feel free to jump in. Marsha, go ahead.
Thank you. The plenary session.
Can you start again? Because we lost you for a bit.
Yeah, I think if I may just allow me to turn off the camera so I can just deliberate on that, because I think my network is Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly share that overall, I have this reflection and insights that might have a bit still challenging to actually mainstream DRR in environmental definitions. Due to lack of capacity, but sometimes also due to the nature of the humanitarian programming. But I think there should be some, of course, some endeavor or some efforts in actually particularly strengthening some tools and approaches, and as well capacity building to progressively bring the environmental dimensions DRR, particularly also with regards to natural-based solutions, which is very challenging. I mean, to just foresee in the first space, particularly when dealing with emergency and preparedness tools. And those are some of the issues that are quite challenging in most of the, particularly at country level, when dealing with emergency or humanitarian programming tools. So this is just to bring this reflection and to progressively think about addressing enhancing the capacities in that regard, because it's still an area that still represents a huge challenge. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and we can see, of course, also what opportunities kind of exist with this humanitarian reset or whatever is happening, potentially happening or not happening. But I think, Nishani.
Hi, I think one of the additions to it on how we work and how we mainstream the challenges we've heard from local national organizations. And one of the solutions that they do find is that the Cash for Work program really does allow them to be more flexible to use that funding to support communities with the DRR activities. And that's the only flexibility most often they get when funding's transferred down and it's very project based. So using that Cash for Work for DRR work has been useful for them.
Interesting. Thanks for that addition.
I think one point that maybe as we're here at HNPW, we can still reflect on, and I will happily put that into the write-up as well, is that I see still a bit of a disconnect in these discussions when we have them with UN organizations or within UN organizations and what we're doing in the Red Cross. And we're doing quite often very similar things in parallel, and we don't talk to each other a whole lot. I think there's a lot of resources that we can exchange. Like there's all of the guidance that we talked about earlier. Here, there is of the work that the Red Cross has now been doing on disaster risk reduction in FCV settings with the handbook we have. There is also something that's called the Nature Navigator, which is specifically nature-based solutions for Red Cross, Red Crescent international societies that could be very interesting to also feed over into other conversations. So I think there's a lot of tools and resources available that just really scattered across organizations. We love putting our own labels on resources, right? But we don't really share them a whole lot with each other.
Yeah.
So hopefully as part of the outcomes from the session, we can also make sure that we just all put all of this information just in there.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good point. And the Climate and Environment Charter is also doing a good job at kind of collecting all those resources. And yeah, it's a very good point. Go ahead.
I don't know if it's a nature-based solution. It's probably not, but just going back as something I mentioned here, my house is 1805, built of dry stone wool without any cement, and lots of houses are in Europe. Traditionally, maybe that was also, I just saw in the video, there's a lot of stones there, and the old thatching, there's a lot of probably elderly men in that, in those societies that used to build. I don't know if they did have to use dry stone walling houses, but it's just so much cheaper than bricks. I saw some bricks somewhere.
Yeah.
And thatch roofs, thatching. It's a dying out skill, but it's super skill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that goes back to that local knowledge kind of component.
Yeah,
and bringing it back. I mean, we see a bit of a revival in Europe around some of these things, but yeah. Okay, I think we are kind of at the end of the session, so maybe we'll stop it here. But yeah, feel free to put anything in the chat in terms of the resources, and like I said, we will be sharing the outcomes as well. So we'll really, we look forward to your contributions to that. So just to flag that we also have the global platform for disaster risk reduction taking place here in Geneva, the CICG, in early June, fully hybrid. Do register, because even to participate online, you'll get access to that online conference room, and it'll be a little bit more interactive. So we have a session there on nature-based solutions. We have a session on disaster risk reduction in fragile and conflict settings. There's sessions on recovery, on data risk, a lot of things. So I think it will be definitely a good kind of networking opportunity, and usually we have like 5,000-6,000 people there. So I think it's a good one to keep your eyes on. And maybe also when we send out the synthesis, we'll share kind of a call, ideas for collaboration. So UNDRR and the Global Shelter Cluster are still working in Madagascar, Yemen, potentially Nigeria. Like we were saying, it's all about collaboration and partnership. And I think there's an opportunity also, like we have done, is to kind of work together, pool our resources, pool the technical capacity that we have, and achieve something together. So I put that call to everyone as well, to collaborate for greater impact.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention, we're also at the Global Shelter Cluster putting together a compendium of case studies on greener shelter innovations and interventions, and we'd like for there to be like a strong climate change adaptation DR component to that. So if you sign up to our newsletter, we'll be putting out an update soon with how you can contribute to that. And yeah, do come and have a look at the global platform, particularly the session with the Yemen Shelter Cluster presenting at the Ignite stage, where you'll hear firsthand from one of our local shelter cluster partners there about all of this great work that they're doing there as well. And I also just wanted to thank again SCC and the GFFO for their support for our work. We couldn't do without you, so thank you so much. And Pablo, did you want to mention something?
No,
you were giving me hand signals, so.
No, I was asking, but thank you very much to you for organizing the session and for everyone who participated. That was it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. I thought you wanted to do that. The other session.